And then I would like to introduce to you our little panel. We're having a mini panel discussion this afternoon. So we have Veronica Schilling with us. She is an EMBA alumna of ESMT. It's always great to have you back in the house, Veronica. And she is now at Zalando and in charge of group diversity. No, that was at Allianz, so sorry. At Zalando, head of culture, diversity, inclusion, and the future of work. But she is mainly involved all the time in transformation. So we have a real transformation expert with us today. With no further ado, let me turn over to Jan Malte, or as I like to call him, JM. JM, the floor is yours.
Can I see the slides? Yes, you can start. I don't see the slides. Should we fine? So welcome, and thank you very much, Molly. So today, welcome to the Employer of the Future, a very important and interesting topic, to be honest. Why is it important and interesting? Well, because of the Great Resignation. Well, the Employer of the Future, right? Yeah. So because of the Great Resignation. It's quite a bold title, right? There's actually a title used by the BBC in the last year, but it's actually not referring to... It's actually not referring to something negative. The Great Resignation refers to something actually positive. You can see the person in the video smiling. Well, that's not something negative, right? It refers to kind of re-evaluating your workplace, kind of changing your work habits, reconsidering your employer. And that's what we're going to talk to you about today. So what are the change makers here? The change makers are a new generation joining currently the workforce, right? Gen Z. And on the other side, we have a global pandemic currently taking place, changing society and workplace values. So let's take a deep dive. So the global pandemic, what did it change? Well, basically, it forced many companies right in the home office. But in the same time, employees also started to reconsider their employers and basically started to reconsider, well, maybe I want more from my employer, maybe a home office setup, for example. So employees started to reevaluate their workplace in terms of work-life balance, salary, flexibility, purpose, all the different things. It's not something I'm making up right now. It's actually a study also proven by Personio, for example. So all the ones are related to work-life balance and flexibility. So you see here, spending more time is really getting more important. The study by Personio was done actually this year. It asked basically employees around the world to dive into, or well, to tell what has changed since the pandemic has hit, what has changed for you. And most of the people who answered said, well, spending more time with my family is more important for me nowadays. And that makes sense. So work-life balance and flexibility is much more important, but so is salary. Salary is still very much important. It makes sense, it relates to security and stability at the same time. But then we also have with number 3, purpose. Purpose is still very much important, and it's actually a new kind of work value joining nowadays. So what changed on the other side with the new generation? Well, we have Gen Z currently joining the workforce, bringing in new values. Gen Z, born between 1995 and 2012, of course, depending on the definition, but it brings in new values, but also it has same values as with Gen Y. So it's not totally new. I'm myself between Gen Z and Gen Y. I'm not completely sure, to be honest, what I am, but generations defined for Gen Z. That's not only done by the year they were born in. It's also done by something called the age period cohort confound. This is driving values. What is it related to? It basically states that besides the year they were born in, a certain generation, also major events taking place are reshaping entire generations. That means, for example, the global pandemic is reshaping an entire generation, bringing in new values and shaping, well, people, basically. So we have now the integration of new and also old work values. According to different research, we see that intrinsic motivation is very important for Gen Z, meaning salary. We see that a desire to work less is also still important. Kind of doesn't really make sense, right? We want to work less, but still receive more money? Nah, doesn't really make sense, but still, this is the case. And we want new ways of work, meaning modern work. So why does it actually matter? Why are we sitting here today? Well, it matters because of something called the person-organization fit. So, well, you basically know that a person has certain values, right? A company has certain values. And you need to make sure that these are aligning. Well, this is pretty basic, I know. But still, it's something that we're not fully aware of sometimes. If you have a personalization fit, so values are aligning, you basically have job satisfaction. It leads to job satisfaction. Also pretty basic, but still something we don't connect all the time. So if you have job satisfaction, you have happier employees, you have happier clients, you have recurring revenue, you have in the end a better company performance. Pretty basic connection, but still something we need to be aware of. And that's why we need to look at values today. So the research, what have we done now? Why are you sitting here? Well, in order to research values, we had the sample of the Global Network for Advanced Management. That means 31 business schools, ESMT is one of them, and 23,000 possible participants. That's quite a big number. Of course, you can only get a really small sample of those 23,000, but it's quite international as well. And our goal was simply to define relevant work attributes for those students. Well, what we did is, first we had to define job attributes in general, what could be relevant. Then we had to create a valid survey to measure them, and then we had to analyze and conclude, of course. Pretty straightforward, to be honest. But what did we do now? We used something called a conjoint analysis. A conjoint analysis is a well-known method in marketing. It checks the importance of attributes and removes rationalization bias and self-reported limitations. Fancy words, right? Well, just to give you an example. If I ask you now, is sustainability important for you in a job? You'd probably tell me, yes, it's important for me. If I'd ask you now, is a high salary important for me? Yes, you'd probably tell me it's important for me. Great, I haven't really learned anything, but I know that sustainability and a high salary is important for you. Well, a conjoint analysis does it differently. So if I offer you now job A with sustainability, but a low salary, and job B with no sustainability and a high salary, and then you have to rate those. Well, to be honest, well, you might look at it, you might say, yes, I like sustainability, but money is a little bit better. So you're starting to rate, and probably you're saying, well, job A is good, but not as good as job B. And this is what a conjoint analysis is all about. So really measuring which attributes are really, really important for you. And that is what we have done. So we've chosen now different attributes based on literature, ranging from work-life balance over career path to purpose-driven. So just various different attributes, 15 in total. We've taken those, in a conjoint analysis, we've taken those 15 attributes with 2 to 3 levels each, meaning a level could be, let's take attribute salary, and it has 3 levels, meaning above industry average, and below industry average. Those are 3 levels. And every attribute had 2 or 3 levels. We've put them in a conjoint analysis tool. We created 32 different job profile cards. It looked like those, and we put them in a survey, and students had to rate them from 0 to 10. What basically starts to happen is that you start to look at the job profile card, which is kind of like a job offer, and you start to look at it, and you kind of, after 3 to 4 cards, you start to look only at a few attributes. For me, it was salary was driving for me, remote work was driving for me, and sustainability was actually driving for me. If it had the right level, I rated it higher. And this is basically what happens. So we can really start to nail down what's really important for students. So, but you are interested in the results. That was just about the method. Well, we had 626 valid responses, meaning responses with more than 75% of fully answered cards. We had 29 out of 31 business schools participating, average age of 29, great because of more work experience. We had 40% female, 58% male, and 72 different countries. Top ranging countries were China, US, and India. So pretty international, to be honest, which was great for us. So the most important attributes. Well, that was kind of surprising and not surprising at the same time. Let's just dive into it. The most important was, of course, salary. Salary needed to be above industry average. That was just driving. It is, of course, connected to security and stability as well. Then you have type of contract. Type of contract needed to be permanent. People don't want a temporary contract. Remote work. Well, remote work needed to be possible. That is, of course, a new work value here, which was interesting because all the other 4s, like company reputation and status, are classic work values, to be honest. But at least remote work is a new work value. Company reputation, it needed to be prestigious. So a good company name, a good company history, and maybe it is kind of also connected to sustainability and diversity, because nowadays this feeds into company reputation. And then lastly, status. Status means your status as a person. People wanted to be a manager. Also makes completely sense. But in the end, it boils down to classic work values, except for remote work, are really driving still, especially for Gen Z and Gen Y. So we said, okay, maybe there are a few differences between men and women. Yes, they are. Not among the top 3, they remained the same, but for female, we had purpose joining here. A purpose-driven company was important for female participants. So purpose in general is something also to consider in the future. But still, for male, actually, well, status went up. So males wanted to be a manager. So we started to look at that, and then we decided, well, okay, let's take it from a cultural perspective. What are maybe implications here? Maybe there are a few differences. And what we did is basically we clustered countries together, only the biggest kind of in terms of participants, in terms of citizenships. We couldn't kind of cover the entire Earth because we didn't have enough participants everywhere. So we just had to focus on a few ones. So on the left side, you can see all participants in comparison to Western Europe, for example, to the different clusters. What we can see here, no new values, but just remote work went a little bit up. Type of contract went down. So still no values, but slight differences between the kind of countries. If you look at North America, we actually see a new work value. Sustainability joins here. So it tells us sustainability is also something actually quite important because it's among the top 5 of all 15. Type of contract went down, company reputation went up, remote work went up. So remote work, once again, very, very, very important, and once again, a new work value. Eastern Asia, Japan, South Korea, China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, didn't have any new values. Status went up, remote work went down, which is interesting because the newest work value is kind of the 5th. It's still in there among the top 5. South Asia, India, Pakistan, Iran, Bangladesh, introduced again sustainability. That was really important for participants coming from that area. So once again, classic work values, except for remote work and sustainability. So that was interesting. But then we thought, maybe there are a few differences among the industries, right? Finance, etc. So we clustered the biggest industries in terms of participants together and looked into those. So meaning students who indicated they have experience or they want to work in a certain area. So let's look at finance. Finance didn't have any new introduction in terms of work values, but as you can see, the significance of salary was the highest measure ever. So salary is the most important and most driving actually attribute, especially in finance. If we look at manufacturing, sustainability is introduced once again. Sustainability is important for manufacturing, at least for people interested in manufacturing. Looking at consulting, the company reputation went up, makes sense considering all the big names, the big 4, etc. Remote work went down, also makes sense because in consulting you're traveling around much anyway. So, but still no new values here, still classic and one new work value, remote. And then IT, that was the last cluster, no new work values, status went up, company reputation went down. It was interesting for me actually to see it. We see differences among like kind of all the things we've measured, but only small differences, but still differences. So what are the conclusion and recommendations now? Salary is of course the strongest driver. It was still interesting for me because I didn't expect it that much, but it was very, very, very much significant. So salary is strongest driver. Then remote work and company reputation have also a strong standing. Why am I pointing that out? Remote work, of course, makes sense because it was introduced during the pandemic. And company reputation, well, that is actually related, as I stated earlier, to sustainability, to diversity, to all the values, to purpose, for example, we consider as like important values nowadays. So company reputation really feeds into that. But once again, remote work, and just to point out one statement here, we see nowadays still movements where companies want to move back. I just wanted to point it out because according to our research, this is not modern at all, the statement by Elon Musk here. So basically, culture, that's the third one, culture also influences. That might be a no-brainer for you, I know. However, I thought, to be honest, with an international business school, with an international environment, you kind of have an international mindset. I thought it, to be honest. It wasn't the case. There were some differences, some major differences among the different cultures. And then work attributes change depending on the industry. It's also a no-brainer, but I still thought, well, there might be some similarities among the industries. So it has, for me, really proven a lot of things, which I didn't expect, to be honest. But what does it mean now for businesses? It's very generic, to be honest, because We need to be aware of our value proposition. Businesses need to be aware of their value proposition. It often seems like businesses are not aware of what they're actually offering, if it's good or not. Meaning, what's the salary? Meaning, do I have remote work? Do I offer it? And once I know that, if I'm aware of my value proposition, then I need to look at my target profile. Does it fit in the industry? Does it fit at the culture? And if that's not fitting, you need to tailor it together and create industry and job-specific job offers to the target profile. And last but not least, be transparent. This is pretty much related to salary, mostly related to salary. Because people nowadays, and I know it also from my co-workers and colleagues, we start to compare salaries. We want transparency here. That's really, really important for us. If not, we feel like being fooled. So transparency is key in many, many different things here. So what do we need to be aware of? According to our research, salary, of course, needs to be above industry average. It needs to be at least industry average. That's just really important. Type of contract, it needs to be permanent. Also makes sense. It's related to stability and security. Remote work needs to be possible nowadays. That's driving. It's really driving. It was always among the top 5. And company reputation needs to be prestigious. So sustainability, diversity, equality, inclusion, and purpose, this is feeding into company reputation nowadays. We have to be aware of that. But we also have a sort of implication for us as a business school. We need to do a better job in educating the importance of sustainability, diversity, equality, inclusion, purpose, and work-life balance. It was never among the top 5 or just barely among the top 5. And it has big relevance and we need to be aware of that. Apparently we're not aware of it, otherwise it would have been among the top 5. But let's take it on stage, because I'm not an expert, but we have an expert here. So please welcome Veronica Schilling, Head of Culture, Diversity, Inclusion, and Future of Work at Zalando.
So, thank you, Jan. Could you hand Veronica the microphone that is working? I'll stay here on the outside. Veronica, why don't you go into the middle, and Jan, have a seat on the edge. The question, so before we're going to take questions from the floor and also from the virtual guests as well. I want to say thank you, Jan, for a wonderful presentation. I saw people taking notes, and I will let you know that we will. So this is Jan's master's thesis. He's still writing the master's thesis. Once it is finished, we will publish this as well and do some also a little PR work around that to see what's happening with the in the different global network schools, especially. So while we get the microphones, yeah, we have it sorted. Thank you. So I would like to start with one question for you, Veronica. My first question is this really anything new to you? Are these survey results from this, around 1,000, we'll call it 1,000 business school students? Was this new for you?
Well, I think the ranking has become newer. So especially the whole topic around flexibility. I think what we are seeing in the workplace right now is that we have to see an employee as the full person and no longer in the parts of spending the 8 hours with us, but actually the complete part of the home, the family, the importance of intangible assets, which has become really important. So everything to do with health, to do with voice of employees, to do with their homes, their families. So that's, I think, what is now becoming top priority in what we think about every day. Yeah.
And did you find anything that really surprised you, Jan?
Actually, I did a pilot study before with students also at ESMT. And I was surprised even the pilot study was salary. I kind of hoped that salary wasn't, of course I understand it's driving, but it was sort of surprising that we didn't have enough new work values within the top 5 ranking. They were important to some extent, but not that much important as I thought they would be.
So you would like to change the business school and the world, I see. So, which I think is wonderful. I think we have to have ideals, definitely. Let's take a look at the survey results. So if we take exactly that salary and security. So these are still the most important factors for Generation Z. So how do you think, Veronica, can a company provide the security that maybe goes beyond just the salary?
Well, I think it still remains that salary is important. So for us as a company, we spend quite a lot of time making sure that we are making our salaries, that what we offer is competitive. because the industry we are in, especially in the tech industry, we do see, frequent movements of people being attracted by salaries. So we make sure we do that. We make sure transparency you spoke about, very important. And I can also, say, sharing about salaries is very common in the company that I work with. People just have the Excel sheet online and everybody just puts in whoever feels like sharing their salary. So that salary transparency exists across the organization, triggered by employees wanting to have that. And so the security part that we always assure employees right currently in the pandemic situation is duty of care is high priority for us. Protecting the employees at all time as we are transitioning, not just in the pandemic, but also we're coming into what we call as potentially another recession. It's already here. So how do we protect the employees? So these are other things that we talk about intensively and also reinforce the messages. And at the same time, I think integrity has become really important. So what Jan was saying, that the transparency. So tell us like it is. As soon as we start to say, well, you're not communicating, people get really anxious. So I think this is also the change that we see. So we kind of tried very much to tell our leaders to be transparent as much as you can. And if you don't know, say, don't know. And all of this provides the security someone needs in the workplace at this point of time.
Do you have anything to add from your results?
I think it's just great to see that you're moving already in that way, because it's not related to my results now, but much more to also my colleagues, for example. And because we discuss a lot about it, but what we earn, what we should earn, etc. It's cultural. It's often cultural dependent if someone wants to share it or not. But normally, if we share it, we really start to get, it starts to get interesting, because then we know kind of our value in the marketplace. And that's interesting for us to see.
So if we move beyond salary, I would like to say, what about status? I thought this was completely fascinating. So the men are more interested in status. Certain regions of the world are more interested in status. What does this say about women and men and the differences? We talked a little bit about it before with purpose. What do you see a difference between men and women? Can you say that in that way, or is there, and who would rather lead? Can you see that at Zalando or in your time at Allianz?
Well, I think purpose is all about improving lives of others. I think this is always the trigger point. I mean, the organization that I'm with at this point of time, Zalando, one of our mindset is purpose first, ego second. So we actually have quite a bit of dialogue in the organization, because people say it's difficult to be egoless. So you need some kind of ego to make a career, to drive yourself, etc. But I do feel that a culture can be created where there is less ego in place. And that is attractive actually for women. And in the last 2 years, we have seen, for us, women succeed at all levels of, leadership and hierarchy. So I do feel that this whole idea of having an ego-less organization does attract, it's attractive for women. But also I feel that it's attractive for anyone who is who finds priorities like sustainability, priorities of creating a better world and making a difference. They are attracted by these, by purpose, I would say.
Right. The idea, it seems to me, to be very interesting to say, okay, let's take ego back a little bit, but what are the concrete steps? What does that mean in a day-to-day job?
Well, I mean, for us, it's pretty straightforward, right? So we have founders, and they actually exhibit a lot of that. In their storytelling, it's always inspiring when you hear a founder talk about that he or she, or he in this particular case, was packing boxes and putting flip-flops in it and building a company from the scratch. And this kind of storytelling is what actually gets repeated in the organization, and everyone is focused on let's get the things done rather than, what's my next step?
Interesting. So I would like to, I'm going to open up to the floor in just a moment because we only have about 15 more minutes, but I have one set of questions. So I think, like, Jan, you put your research together. You said your recommendations, analyze your value proposition internally and externally, analyze your target profile, tailor your offering, and be transparent. So we've talked about the transparency. But my question, I don't want to be too critical here, but is this really new or is it just a different packaging? Do you think that this would offer like sustainably something new for your fellow students, your colleagues?
It's not something new, not at all. It's not also not critical. I totally get that. It's not something new, but it's just something like you're talking about the basic recommendations also for companies, right? And it's not something new, not at all, but it's still something which I currently don't see, and also my colleagues don't really see a lot taking place in the workplace right now because, well, I don't know, but it's not really fully aligning with like the job offers we see. They're not fully aligning with what, for example, business students here at ESMT or in general friends of mine actually would like to see. And this just points out to me that even that generic kind of recommendations here for businesses are not done in a sort of way. So yeah, it's generic, but it's not really happening.
Is there any way that Zalando is working against this? Are there any new or experiments that you're doing when hiring?
Well, I think a couple of things. So a huge focus, I think, in the whole topic of health, making sure that we are providing as much as possible the support, we call it high support, for our employees. I mean, that's one of the big pieces we saw. And also taking some really, big steps, right? So for example, last year we just said we're going to close a whole week of the offices and let people have that additional break. So taking those kind of real bold steps kind of helps people to understand, well, the organization is trying very hard to take care of its employees. On the other hand, I also see that even when we are talking about remote work and flexibility, we are still in a transition phase. We haven't got the best solution yet at this point of time. So we are all trying things and experimenting. And I think here too, we need to continuously, go the next step. Be bold, I would say.
Thank you. So I'd like to open up questions to the floor. So I have one here. I would ask you to turn on the microphone next to you so our viewers at home can also hear you. And I also have some virtual questions coming in. So
I hope it's turned on now. I guess so, because it's red and I can hear my voice. Excellent, perfect. So you mentioned already a few surprising facts, and I think there's one more surprising fact in the survey results, and this is that many people are going for a permanent position or looking for something permanent. I thought we are moving to the gig economy, to a freelancer economy, so I'm really surprised to see that in Gen Z. Did you explore this further, or do you have any answer for that?
That's a really good point. For me, it was nice actually to see that people want to have permanent jobs. I totally get your point that, of course, we also have the freelancer economy. However, I think if we start to look at, the sample was related to business students here. So we had business students of the Global Network for Advanced Management. And I strongly assume, I haven't dived into that, but I strongly assume that people, especially from those business schools, they want to have a permanent contract. They want to have stability in some way. And that's, I think, the main reason why this kind of came out as the result. It's also something I had recently a conversation with a friend of mine, and she got offered a temporary position, meaning 18 months at a company. She didn't really feel good about it. She was also a business school student. She didn't feel good about it because it didn't offer her stability, security in the end. And especially in the times of like nowadays, having crisis in mind, having inflation in mind, we want to have stability.
let me go ahead.
Maybe just to add to this, Jan, I think there's also the sense of belonging, which is becoming, very important. So people want to belong to a community, an organization, and people within, and they don't want to have this, restricted time as well. So I think that's also a driver for wanting to have, permanent association with any organization.
So I have an online question from Hans Christian Edenharder. So what was done to mitigate the implicit bias by asking only business school students? So compare with other surveys or results of similar surveys.
That's a good question, and I thought it might come up. I was afraid, but no. I mean, the bias is there. It is there. So the survey it needs to be done again outside of the sample. But we had the sample, that was our given, and that's why we took the sample. But again, those results need to be checked again outside of that sample. So that's a bias. It's taking place. It's a big bias, but yeah, we wanted to focus especially on those GNM students, and we wanted to measure work values of those GNM students. So the bias is there. Yeah, we need to do another survey.
I also thought about the same thing when Jan was talking to me about the study. But on the other hand, I felt that it was in a way accurate, because we are talking about when people are outside an organization. But as soon as they are inside the organization, then culture becomes so important. The experiences of purpose, understanding the strategy, the growth part, how can I grow here in this organization? If I'm a minority, do I feel that I can succeed here? All of those things becomes important. And sustainability goals, for example, is a huge topic in organizations like Zalando. So this is probably where we then see the difference when the salary is settled.
Yeah, you're right.
Got lots and lots of questions. I have one directly here, and then I'll go here, and then I'll go here, and then I'll take online. So here we go.
Thank you so much. So I would just like to pick up what you just said, because I work with young leaders, and we really see a difference between the predictive motivators that attract people to organizations. And if you look at the study that you did, it's everything is in the future, right? So what would be the decision criteria before I step into an organization? It would be really interesting to ask that exact sample after 1 or 2 years in an organization, because there might be a shift there. And I'm absolutely with you. I also from young leaders hear that salary is important, but it is, if you look at other studies on motivation and daily motivation linked to performance, it is a hygiene factor. If you pay somebody more, you will get transactional performance, but you will not have commitment, and you will not be able to create a sense of belonging and of purpose by this factor salary. So it would be really interesting to maybe check on them in some years and see if there's a potential shift here.
I fully agree, and it's a very, very good point, because what we have to keep in mind, I keep it short, what we have to keep in mind also is that there's a general shift in shift in the generation. So once you get older, the stability and security values, of course, they start to have more importance. And this is a shift with which every generation had, according to literature and research. So very, very good point, and we should do that again in 1 or 2 years.
Thank you very much. I think it's wonderful research that you are doing, first of all. I just want to check with you in terms of what I'm hearing and what Veronica is also saying. This whole thing about Geist support, which means is your well-being and your care. What is going to change in terms of what you found and what people are saying is about psychological safety in the workplace and the role of the leader in the workplace, because that's very important. And then the other one is, how is psychological contract actually challenged in terms of this?
Wow, great question. Great questions. In terms of psychological safety, we would have to deep dive into that, especially what it means, because it's really, psychological safety really depends on every human being. Every mindset is different here. I strongly assume that nowadays, taking into consideration what we experience in the entire world, psychological safetiness is related to salary in the end here, because they feel more safe, to be honest. That's my take on that. You disagree?
Yeah, I think psychological safety is going to be critical, especially from a perspective of a very diverse workforce. We are all dealing with a diverse workforce. So psychological safety has a lot to do with, do I have a voice in the organization? Am I listened to? Can I, express myself freely? Can I be an authentic self? These are topics that are for us a huge priority because our employees demand that we talk about it very openly. So one of those things that we have done at Zalando the whole time during this pandemic is having dialogues on topics like this, dialogues, very open dialogues on racism, open dialogues on transgender in the workplace, very, important dialogues on how we, show empathy to each other and so on. So I think it's going to be a differentiator in terms of culture. When someone walks into the organization and if they don't feel that there is a safe space, then there is going to be the risk of more, I think, leavers or disconnected with the organization.
We've got to take 2 last questions, so because we have to stop on time so you can go to your next breakout session. We will do more on this topic, I promise, so once we've got everything going, but we had 1 question here and 1 question here because I promised you both. So I'll take both questions before we answer.
Thank you. I really enjoyed your research. Thank you for that. I want to focus on the work-life balance values. And if we look at the Generation X, which still has about 15 to 20 years left in the workspace, and we look at one of their values of working really hard, being self-efficient and driven in that way, how do you think we're going to manage the mismatch between X and Z?
Okay, so before we take that one, let's get the question here too.
Well, my question was pretty much asked already before, but just a hypothesis. You said that your generation of students, right, they were very stressed about the salary. Some of us went through that, and especially when you have this debt outstanding, it's you are so much driven by this number that all of the rest is pretty, I mean, in this group of 29 years old, right, it will be really interesting if you have the resources and the horizon to do this further with the same people in 3 or 5 years, you pretty much end up where you started in the school, right? You would say, I'm okay to take a pay cut of 10K, but for this I'll get right? And it will be really interesting to see from, for Zalando especially, like you have multiple balls in the air, right? You could do the remote work, you can do salary cut or whatever, or increase. That's interesting that actually everybody will pick something different from the table. And that's why it's for you, especially like you wanna, but you still cannot eat 3 burgers or drive 2 cars, right? Even with a good salary. So it will be nice to see if you could prolong the study, and so it's not a question, no need to answer. Thank you.
Thank you. And to the question of Gen Z compared to Gen Y.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good point. For the question, we have a strong trend for individualization. It's a very good question, and there might be a strong problem in there. I'm not an expert, not at all, but what I saw from literature and from my research is that we need individualization here. So every type of human being, they want to be kind of valued. So we need individual offers and individual approaches for each and every one. And that's kind of how I think the strategy should be. There's no general answer, to be honest.
I want to thank you all, everyone in the room. I want to thank all of our virtual viewers as well. Thank you, Veronica. Thank you, Jan.